All right, so I am back, and here's the deal with this. Um, this the title of this is "Blame It All on Women." So Jonah Goldberg is infamous for throwing around his feminist credentials, but today he comes face to face with the real deal. Helen Lewis joins the show to put an end to Jonah's performative feminism. So, how can I possibly resist? How can I possibly resist showing this? Well, I can't. So, let's see what this is about. And before I do that, let me go ahead and drop the link before I forget it. Um, Panel. Couldn't do that. Oops. And pin it. And let us begin. Thank you very much, Dirty, for that. Yeah, everybody please make sure you hit the like button. This is pop up, but yeah, I talked about that. He died at 74, Rick. Standing firm. Yeah, okay. So here we go. This is Jonah Goldberg. We're gonna blame it all on women. Oops. Sorry.
Very excited. Technically, Brit Week is over, but Brit Week lives forever in our hearts. And so we have a widely acclaimed staff writer at The Atlantic, Helen Lewis, here with us today to talk to us about this big new cover story she's got, The Men Who Don't Want Women to Vote or Work or Have Opinions. And so she's here as partly for her work and partly for her opinions to tell us more about it. Helen Lewis.
Oh, wait, I know who she is. What the fuck is she doing over here? So I didn't know she wrote for The Atlantic. She's got a podcast and she writes for this, or maybe used to, maybe still does write for this kind of British tabloid, but it's kind of a left-wing tabloid. But anyway, I didn't know she wrote for The Atlantic. Very interesting.
Welcome to The Remnant.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's I think there's been a lot of attention to what you might call the manosphere, which is the kind of very social media influenced men's movement online. And this is a step behind that. I've called it masculinism, which is a word that's been around at least since the 90s. Essentially opposition to feminism, stressing the primacy of men, wanting to get back to traditional gender roles. Some of it's religiously inflected, some of it's secular, some of it's even Muslim, actually, which is so, and it's a kind of interesting constellation of people behind it. But really this kind of intellectual force in American life, particularly on the American new right, that is about saying feminism has gone too far. It's made women unhappy. It's made society weak. Everyone is too empathetic now. And if you've got high testosterone, you should be voting for Donald Trump, maybe, 3 times.
Okay, so we should make some distinctions. I think distinctions always sort of matter. I don't know what you know about me, but like I have a great deal of what social scientists call contempt for a lot of the new right. I grew up in conservative world. In fact, my mom was fairly prominent in the conservative backlash of the 1970s to feminism, and my wife was pretty prominent in a different generation of conservative backlash to feminism. And a colleague of mine in the American Enterprise Institute wrote a book called The War Against Boys. And Richard Reeves, who I have a lot of respect for, at the Institute for Men and Boys, American Institute for Men and Boys, talks about, the real problems that boys have. And so, at the same time, Nick Fuentes is a racist, anti-Semitic incel who I have.
Well, Speak Radio, I am watching the white version of I don't know. I guess it would be something like a what's his name? T. Hassan um, Johnson, or like a white version of 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 what's his name? Dr. St. James. Can't think of his first name. So this is white people talking about the manosphere and blame it all on women for a refreshing change.
Zero respect for. And Doug Wilson, I think, who used to be an enormous fan of mine. And I actually wrote, just so you know, I wrote the preface to the Christopher Hitchens, Doug Wilson book about the existence of God.
Right. Okay.
Tried to split the baby between the two of them, as it were. And I don't like where Doug Wilson has gone. And I don't like a lot of that stuff. But my only point is that there's a lot of stuff that's thrown in with the supposed backlash against feminism that's actually pretty serious and is worth thinking about in terms of the plight of young men. And then there's a lot of stuff that is just misogynistic nonsense. And so rather than me continue to make these distinctions between things, I'm wondering whether you make such distinctions or how you make such distinctions. What do you think is a serious argument and what do you think is not?
Oh, I absolutely think there are serious arguments. And one of the things that I've done in the piece is say this is a movement that has defensible forms and alarming forms. It has lots of entry points. Just to give you an example of one of the ways in which I think men are having a tough time, my colleague McKay Coppins just did a really brilliant piece where he was given $10,000 to gamble on this new, very hyper addictive smartphone betting prediction markets. You can bet on absolutely everything. And the vast majority of people in America who have a problem with those apps and a problem with gambling are men. And they're young men primarily. But the single thing you would say about the profile of that person is men. And we could go into, there's any number of COD psychological reasons why that might be. It might be about testosterone and risk taking. It might be about free, money, whatever it is. But we do know that it is a particular problem for men. And therefore it requires a gender specific solution. Right? There's no point feminists going out and trying to solve that problem. It requires probably older men talking to younger men about it. And, I did a program for the BBC that was about the manosphere before, and I went to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym. And that was really fascinating to me too, because that was also a space where you had older men teaching younger men to control their capacity for violence, to channel it into discipline and into these ways that were about bettering themselves. And I thought that was quite, therefore that was a kind of single sex intersection that I thought was really good and pretty healthy. And actually maybe a mixed sex space wouldn't have worked quite so well for that. So I think there's a whole load of that stuff that is interesting to me. I wrote a history of feminism, so that's the standpoint that I come to a lot of this stuff from. But as you say, there's an awful lot of lazy, just so story crap that gets hand waved under the banner because it's something that we all know. I'll give you a recent example. Trigonometry, a podcast that I've watched a lot, had the host Adam Carolla on. And he said the coronavirus response was feminine. And, I spent a lot of time writing about the arguments about lockdowns and whatever it was. I was on the side of people saying, I'm from Europe where we were much more strict about like the schools are the last thing to close and the first thing to open, and the way that blue states, I think, really stuffed that up, possibly as a result of the influence of the teachers' unions. But in what world was the coronavirus response feminine when it was led by Anthony Fauci, Donald Trump, in California by Gavin Newsom, in Canada by Justin Trudeau? What you're essentially doing is saying that even if men are doing things, if you don't like them, they're feminine. And I found that argument so many times, the cross thing, that anything you don't like is sort of labeled as weak and feminine, even if it's men.
Okay, well, what she happens to miss is that in that argument, you're calling Fauci and Trudeau and, Gavin Newsom feminine. So why she can't pick up on that, I don't know.
Doing it.
Yeah, it sounds pretty preposterous to me, in part because part of the whole anti-vax, anti-COVID crowd was that the response was too draconian. And if the American version was too feminine, would they have preferred the Chinese version, which involved welding people into their apartments, right? Which strong like bull, but like actually more oppressive than what we did in America. But what is the evidence that Carolla, I have no ill will toward it. It's kind of like been on a show. What was his evidence? What was like his shallow evidence that was feminine?
Well, from the clip that I watched, and this is just, maybe he developed this into a thoroughly cited argument later. Let's put that aside. It was essentially that
Sure.
it was weak. It was, and this word that comes up a lot when you hear this is this like pussified. It's this idea that you were a wimp. You were afraid of coronavirus, and therefore you did a lockdown. Whereas real men just toughed it out. They just toughed it out into their iron lung or whatever it might be. And I think it's kind of sad because it reflects a discourse where the worst possible thing for a man to be would be to show any kind of fear or weakness or pain, or in this case, obeying public health rules for other people, right? This was one of the things that was interesting about the coronavirus messaging is the best thing that worked on people was stay at home to save your granddad and grandma. So actually it was a sign of it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of self-sacrifice. Which I don't think is particularly gendered. But I mean, that just came to me as a recent example of watching something. And he linked this to this idea of gynofascism. So this is an example of gynofascism. But the thing that struck me was he said, I've been complaining about this now for 20 years. And I went back and looked up the stats for 2006. 16% of Congress at that time were women and 3% of CEOs leading an S&P company. So your founding date for when you think there was already gynofascism operating in America is a time when actually women were dramatically underrepresented in public life, which to me poses the question, what level of women in public life and decision-making spaces is acceptable that's above zero, that isn't gynofascism? I can see if you're working in a university administration system and 60% of the administrators are female, you might think, actually, this is now, I'm a man, I'm in a minority here, this is tough for me. But when it's 97% of companies are being run by a man, that becomes a harder argument to prosecute. And so I think at some point it just becomes like, I don't like women telling me what to do.
We can get to that, but let's stay on the article just for a second, if that's okay. What did you think of Doug Wilson? I mean, just as a human, was he charismatic? I mean, I know you think he's wrong. That's
right.
Easy,
I think women should be allowed to vote. Here's my extremely controversial, ultra woke feminist opinion. I think women should participate fully in public life by the franchise and no taxation without representation. So yeah, we do disagree on that ideologically. But I think that I didn't know that you'd written the foreword to his book with Woodhouse. No, that's really interesting because we did mention
with Hitchens. With Hitchens,
but sorry. But he said,
oh, sorry about that.
Said to me that they bonded, he and Christopher Hitchens, ultimate new atheist, him a fire-breathing Calvinist pastor, over their shared love of P.G. Woodhouse, this English author from the early 20th century. And I thought that was kind of fascinating because to me, having also once met Christopher Hitchens, read a lot of Christopher Hitchens, they seemed like incredibly similar people. I don't know if that was your experience of it.
So I've never met Wilson in person. I've been on his podcast thing.
You've been on Man Rampant.
No, I don't know. It was not called that when I would remember that. It had something more biblical sounding to it. But he used to write very complimentary things about me, and he got very cross with me recently for criticizing something he said. But he does not loom large in my life. In fact, Hitchens loomed much larger. We actually used to live in the same building and made poor decisions together when it came to drinking from time to time. But I think Hitchens was completely. I shouldn't say wrong. I think Hitchens, his militant atheism was as offensive to me as Doug Wilson's devoutness 15 years ago, right? I'm not talking about the Doug Wilson today and his profile. I should say, as someone who has grown up in this world for a very long time and is now sort of politically homeless, I have met lots of women on the right who have also talked about, usually tongue-in-cheek, about how women shouldn't vote and everything went downhill once women got the vote. There is a very interesting strain of right-wing female sort of contempt for the I don't want to say the median woman, but for the politics of womanhood per se that is sociologically interesting to me, but incredibly fraught for me to speculate about too much.
Why not? Well, I think the thing that's interesting about that, so Richard Hanania, the self-described former white nationalist, had this really interesting article, which I thought was good, where he talked about the fact that in MAGA circles now, it was what he called the based ritual, where people will say something overtly edgy to each other, whether it's racially based or whether it's sexist, or whether it's like the women shouldn't vote, as a way of signaling to each other, like, we're not like those lib cucks who are super offended, we can handle it, which is very similar to the way that people talk in spaces like 4chan, self-consciously edgy online spaces, the kind of edgelord way of doing it. A lot of that rests on the idea that will never happen, and it's not a live political debate, right? It's something you can indulge. In the same way that you could get people, and Doug Wilson has said this, that actually maybe the evils of slavery have been exaggerated. It's kind of a sort of, that argument is dead in political terms. No one is hopefully bringing back slavery in America. So you can afford to kind of play with the fire of it as a way of signaling how, unjudgmental, unwoke, unbothered you are by political correctness, right? That's where I wonder if it comes from those women's genuine belief that women shouldn't be allowed to make political decisions, or if it's seen as saying, I'm not like one of those nannies who goes, like liberal women, and tells you can't do this kind of stuff. Look at me, I'm fun.
Yeah, no, I think that's a bit, I'm fine with outing Ann Coulter. I've heard Ann Coulter say that a zillion times. But there are people who are less deliberately provocative that I've heard say it too. And I think part of it is exactly what you're talking about. It's a kind of shibboleth, right? It's a way to sort of signal that you're part of a tribe. But part of it is also a more generically conservative lament about how modernity has gone down the wrong path, right? So it operates in some ways very similarly to, how we should get rid of, was it the 17th Amendment, which is the direct election of senators. It's like, we need to go back to the old days, so it's like, it's coded in.
That was a more niche kind of edgelord.
Well, no, but I was an edge reviewer for 20 years. As I often tell people, it's funny because it's true. I met Pat Buchanan at my bris. So like, I've been in this world for a really long time. And I come from a world where, like, I know people, the way you signaled that you were swimming against the current of modernity wasn't to say asinine things about women or blacks or Jews or anything like that. It was to lament the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Well, I think we all do that, don't we?
We certainly lost something with that. I mean, to be sure.
I interviewed you said you like rabbit holes, but like, I interviewed the guy who would currently be Austro-Hungarian emperor if there was still an Austro-Hungarian empire. One of the happiest moments of my Atlantic career. Yeah. I know, right?
And he's a Habsburg. Yeah.
He's a Habsburg. He was a member of the European Parliament for a really long time. Yeah. I did a piece about dispossessed European royals and went to Albania to interview the Crown Prince Leka. And then interviewed him, and he had this great line. All of his family have ended up. One of them's the ambassador to Hungary. They've all ended up in these pan-European roles. And I said, will the Austro-Hungarian Empire ever come back? And he said, 2 generations in this framework, it's very little. So, fingers crossed we get the Habsburgs back.
Did he have the creepy Dick Tracy comic book Cro-Magnon jaw? The Habsburg jaw is a problem, right?
I think they've stopped marrying their cousins now for several centuries, so they have now got enough grandparents, unlike the ones in the 1700s. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
No, look, I'm enjoying this, and it's nice to talk to somebody who can talk fast and change subjects quickly, because it's a lost skill these days. So on the,
you know what?
There was this big piece.
That is an odd comment, but he's absolutely right. Like, I don't know how many times I've said, keep up.
Discuss piece and I think it was in Compact. By another Helen Andrews, I think it was, about the great feminization, and or something to that effect. I thought it was directionally interesting and factually flawed in a lot of different ways. But I do think that there is a colorable, plausible argument that um, we did hit a moment where, I'll do it. I'll make an analogy. Roy Teixeira is now a colleague of mine, the American Enterprise Institute, and he wrote a book with John Judas about the emergent democratic coalition or whatever. And it was misread. He will tell you it was misread. I think Roy will actually tell every shoeshine guy on the Eastern Seaboard it was misread, but it doesn't matter. The way it was misread by progressives and Democrats and the Obama administration at that time was demography is destiny. The coalition of the ascendant is full of young people and people of color, and we're going to have a hammerlock on electoral politics forever. And what Roy would say is the way it was misread was that could only conceivably be true so long as the Democratic Party didn't shed the white working class. This is sort of the core of the old FDR through LBJ coalition, whatever. And instead, you got a lot of people saying idiotic things about we don't need white voters anymore. We don't need to compromise. White people are the problem, all that kind of stuff. And you got a white lash or a backlash, whatever you want to call it. And similarly, there was a lot of rhetoric, including from some old friends of mine, like Hannah Rosen, wrote this thing about how the era of men is over, men are done. There's a lot of triumphant sort of talk about how the future is female, as you mentioned in the piece. And one of my big problems is the way in which political activists, and not just politicians pandering to the base, but ideological partisans tell their biggest fans what they want to hear without realizing that other people can hear them too. And I think the way the feminists talked over the last 25 years or so, it's not the primary reason for it. I think there are some other really interesting reasons for it. But like when the Doug Wilson crowd reads that stuff, they're gonna believe it, right? You get a kind of a Baptist and bootleggers kind of phenomenon. Do you think that the rhetoric of feminists in any way has been counterproductive over the last, say, quarter century?
See, I think that's really interesting because one thing I remember my friend saying to me when I wrote my book on feminism, and I would make these sort of airy assertions about what kind of men had said, is he's like, who are you actually arguing with? Are you arguing with, a named person with an institutional title? Or are you arguing with like Princess Sparkle Horse 429 on Tumblr? And I think that's one of the things I would separate out. Like who to you are, and this, I think about this a lot, who are the big leaders of the American feminist movement? I think American feminism has been pretty hollow, actually, and not really much beyond the kind of glib pantsuity stuff and the abortion rights campaign for quite a long time now. That kind of sense of like all the stuff that was happening in the early 1900s of like labor unions for really hard female dominated jobs. That I feel that stuff really withered. So that's the question, is when you say, these feminists have said things that are counterproductive, I wonder actually if we're talking about sort of NGO style people, professional activists, Democratic Party lobby groups, actually, right? Like, I'm not sure Gloria Steinem has been saying anything in her winter years that has been particularly alienating to people. I think probably the head of Planned Parenthood has, for example. They wrote a very famous op-ed in the mid-2020, early 2020s it would have been, that was essentially saying, we apologize for our founder being racist and we're going to be committed to doing the work. And you kind of thought, okay, thank you, Planned Parenthood, but that's not really what we sort of expected from you. But you know what I mean? There was that tone of kind of abasement, and there was also that tone of kind of demeaning men in shitty ways that came across in lots of internet feminism. But as I say, this is the issue, really. Like, name a person who you can put on that, right? Rather than this sort of general miasma of kind of, men.
Well, let me take a head count. Is no one here? Boy. Well, folks, looks like everyone is gone to see Entwine or whatever. And oops. I guess I know when I've gone too far, which is fine. It was a risk doing this pop up at a dirty. Look, bottom line is, you know what? I'm going to do this. Um, dirty. I don't know if you know NPC the game. Gabriel, I forget his last name, but this might be someone that might interest you. If I can find the link here. And sometimes you well, I personally will bore people with uh my own bullshit. Not everyone is interested in stuff like this. So this I think is what I'm going to do. I'm going to just go ahead and fold up this show and pull up the tent. Oh wait, Brooklyn. Hey, well, I guess I guess I'm going to stay for a bit. Um Kimmy, good to see you. Well, this is what I'm doing. Um all right, well, I guess I will have to stay if you're here, Kim. Oh, by the way, I talked to my sister and gave her your YouTube site. And I haven't talked to her in a few days, but she thinks you're pretty. So that's a good start. So all right. Well, look, this is a look at the manosphere, but through a somewhat different lens than, I'm even used to looking. This is Jonah Goldberg, who he is kind of right wing. Um, I'd say he's probably still a neoconservative. Helen Lewis, the woman he's talking to, is a British journalist who is probably on the left, but they're talking about the blame it on all women manosphere stuff. But from I don't know, it's just a different perspective. Maybe it's a more political, cultural perspective. It's not like um, the black manosphere where they just do it in the gutter. You know, you'll do a John Galt talking about beauty, um, what is it, beauty desert, or bull mammies and all this sort of stuff. They don't look at stuff from, well, you know what? The rubber meets the road sort of manosphere is what I'm used to hearing. This is a little bit more of a um, maybe overthinking it, but a little bit more of a loftier perspective. So let's continue. I was going to pull up the tent stakes, but if y'all are interested, it won't be forever. We've got about an hour of this, and if it gets super boring, we can always move on or end the show.
It's quite hard to
Hey,
do,
Moxie.
and I think it's really dangerous to do that because you could equally nitpick from the other side, and kind of attribute. Nick Fuentes does not represent the American right.
Mm-hmm.
And nor do the Groypers. So you have to be really careful about kind of separating that out. But yeah, I mean, as an analysis, I do think I agree with your analysis of the Great Feminization, which is that it said some things that were really interesting. If you profoundly change the sex ratios in jobs, we have evidence that it affects their prestige, for example. Teaching goes from being schoolmasters to being women, and it affects how people think about the role of teaching. It's no longer about its kind of discipline, and it's more seen as more of an empathetic, caring profession. One of the things that I think Richard Reeves and I agree on and have talked about is the fact that I would love to see more men in early years education. I think it's only in Britain anyway, when I last looked into it, 15% of elementary school teachers were men. And that's, I think that's a shame. It'd be really nice to see more boys get a strong male role model in their life early, particularly if they don't have one at home. So I don't think it's ludicrous, and we should dismiss out of hand the idea that the sex ratio of jobs changing will have some effect on both how they are perceived and how people within those industries perceive themselves. But you have to try and, this is what I mean, you have to try and look for the evidence that supports that rather than floating away on this cloud of rhetoric, where it's just, if you're seen as pushing back on it in any way, that's just you being kind of woke rather than you asking for sources, which is surely a good and manly pursuit, if anything.
Sure. And I just looked it up. The book, which began as an Atlantic cover story, was called The End of Men, and the Rise of Women, and it's from 2010.
But I don't remember Hannah being triumphalist in that, right? I remember that being a kind of lament.
No, but I remember the reaction. There's a reaction to it that was closer to triumphalist. And I think this is sort of the part of the problem, right? I mean, that you're sort of getting at, which is that you have people write responsible, reasonable things that may be ideologically pointed and contestable and debatable, but like Roy's book, which was eminently grounded in empirical data stuff, then you get the activist types, you get the partisan types who just pluck out the bits that fit a narrative that is far less grounded in things. And I don't know that there's, no one is responsible for how people misinterpret what you write past a certain point. And so I don't know how this is policed in any serious way, but I'm someone as a conservative who thinks that most of our problems in this country have to do with the failures of institutions, and that institutions are, they're supposed to mold character. They are supposed to take a small r, they're not supposed to be small d democratic. They're supposed to be small r Republican. And we have lost sight of that as we have sort of the cult of democratization of institutions that shouldn't be democratized, starting with our political parties, has led to incredible damage to the culture. But I'm getting far afield, and I'm supposed to be asking questions rather than pontificating.
No, but I agree with that, because I think one of the things that's happened is that everything has become intensely sectarian. And voters have been encouraged to think of themselves through identity groups in a sort of zero-sum contest. So if women are winning, men must be losing. If men are women, women must be losing. And I think you get that with racial groups too. The idea that there should be kind of blocks reserved for this community needs to be represented, which is a good idea, suddenly becomes, well, actually, you can't get elected to this seat unless you have this particular identity characteristic. And to go back to one of the best things that I thought that Obama ever said, makes me a terrible West Wing cliche of a person, but I don't care, is, that you shouldn't have red states and blue states, you should have a United States of America, right? There should be some higher goal that you believe that we are all working towards together. And that's, that there should be some idea of Britishness for British people that anybody from any background can invest in, and a set of values that it doesn't really matter what identity you bring to the table. And I think that's one of the things that has been lost. And it speaks to some of the problems that you're talking about, which is that you have been encouraged to see, well, if we have, we have to have this kind of lock on stuff, otherwise our identity group won't get what we want. And very understandable historical reasons. When women and Black people were locked out of political power in America, their needs were not well served. But it has become a kind of contest of everybody balkanizing, I think, to some extent, more recently. And that's maybe some of the stuff that you've been picking up on.
Yeah. I mean, just as a side note, as presidential rhetoric at a political convention, I had no problem with the United States versus red states and blue state stuff. That's fine. If we're going to, on substance, I would rather have 50 states where Indiana is Indiana and California is California and Texas is Texas. And I think that our attachment to pluralism has been horribly damaged by the homogenization and nationalization of our culture, which is largely the result of technology more than anything else. But I want this country to be a much more interesting place to drive across by letting each state to have a more distinctive culture. Can't have slavery, can't have Jim Crow, can't do all that kind of stuff. But if Oregon wants to live one way and like sell weird cheese that smells like death. I don't think the FDA should have anything to do with it. And
I think that makes you very rare, though. That makes you very, very rare. I mean, that's how I feel too.
this podcast is called The Remnant for a reason.
Right, but this is how I feel. I'd like the idea that people are living and organizing their lives in ways that I don't personally agree with and don't want to live my life that way.
Hey, dirty dude. I've been, I said it a few times on the last stream. So MAGA blacks got off the Democratic plantation to vote for this. And they want the current black Democrats to leave the quote Democrat plantation and vote for this. Dude, these guys have nothing to name me one goddamn thing that I should leave the Democratic plantation for. Dude, these MAGA blacks are idiots.
We are sad, lonely survivors in a political culture in which what people want is my group to be in charge and make everyone do whatever we do. You know, people always ask me all the time for definitions of wokeness, and I always say,
"Hey, dirty, that's going to be a show title. They want to be on the plantation."
It was kind of left-wing totalitarianism in the very few cultural spaces where the left gained power. So the universities, publishing, journalism. It was, we're in charge here, and we don't want pluralism. We want everybody to have our values. And you see that mirror image of that on the right. So
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. No, the Oregonian cheese, I'm afraid, is under attack. It's under threat.
Yeah, like I don't really live the lifestyle of someone from the crunchiest parts of Austin, but I have literally nothing but sympathy for anyone who puts "Keep Austin Weird" on their bumper sticker. Because when I go to Austin, I want it to be Austin. I don't want it to be interchangeable with 25 other cities. And that sort of distinctiveness, I think, is one of the things we kind of lose with too much big government, too much centralized government. I want to send as much power down to the local level as possible. But we're here to talk more about feminism than federalism. So I do want to ask you something. Maybe you can just explain it to me. Like as my Sherpa on this. What do the women who dress like the concubines or whatever we're supposed to call them from A Handmaid's Tale, what message do they think they're sending, and what at political protests, right? You know, they show up at like resistance things and No King's Day, and I find the cosplay bizarre. And I'm just kind of curious what you think of it and how would you explain it?
I mean, I think my root one explanation is that people love dressing up. I went to a Trump rally during the 2020 election, and they had a guy there called Mr. Wall, and he turned up to every single Trump rally that he could make it to, dressed as the border wall. And I thought, what are we doing? What is this for? And then I just thought, it's a carnival. Everybody kind of loves this. And I think so much of protests to people who aren't emotionally invested in the cause seem incredibly cringe. But for the people inside them, you're all dressing the same. You're making a public commitment. It's like professing a religion in a way. You're doing something that marks you out and different from other people that other people will maybe even laugh at or sneer at or whatever it might be. And that more tightly binds you together as a group that all believe the same thing. So I think that, the Handmaid's Tale costume, was a reaction to the feeling that what eventually happened, that the Dobbs decision happened, that Roe versus Wade got rolled back. In lots of states, it's now very difficult to get an abortion. And they weren't wrong that was happening. I mean, one of the things that I write in this piece is that, I did a very viral interview with Jordan Peterson in which I said I support abortion rights with some limits. I come from Europe, which has got a very different culture around these things. But that I think it's necessary for women to be able to control their fertility as a way of being full participants in society, which he obviously disagreed with. And I said, and I think Trump appointed justices would roll back Roe versus Wade. And he kind of like there was this kind of like, and it was really interesting to me that this was just something that was in 2018 considered to be a kind of thing that you would sneer at. And then it actually happened. And I was surprised that he was surprised, because this has been an open, overt goal of the conservative movement. Like, people on the pro-life conservative movement have not been hiding the ball on this one. They're very open. They think it's preventing the murder of children. They've been advocating this for many, many years on very principled grounds. So it was kind of interesting to me that the Handmaid's Tale people get sneered at for saying that a regime might want to control women's bodies. And because it's not untrue, is it? Almost every totalitarian society in history has tried to control women's sexuality and fertility.
Yes,
do you just find it cringe? Do you is it a political critique, or do you just look at it and you just think, give over your nice suburban mums who live somewhere else? You're not living in the Handmaid's Tale.
Well, I've a rich menu of emotions about it. So first of all, I get the sense that some of the women who dress up like that, there's all sorts of cosplay that you could do to choose this thing where you're all going to dress as essentially sex slaves. I don't think it necessarily sends the message that they think it's sending, right? Like their body language with it seems to be that they're kind of enjoying doing that. And I think that's kind of creepy to given their ideological priors. Moreover, I think virtually all mass gatherings of almost any kind are cringe. I think that, I quote this all the time. There's a pastor who's written about this, about how the church is very good about dealing with the pursuit of false transcendence when it comes to 2 out of 3 things, about sex and about drugs, but they're terrible about crowds. And I find crowds to be, I don't like populism. And I find that that some mass protest is obviously warranted and morally justified. The civil rights marches, Martin Luther King and all that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of people who find transcendence in crowds that I find super creepy. And when you start dressing up in this sort of weird projection thing from this movie written by, or this book written by a pretty cliched Canadian feminist from the 1980s, it's just strange to me. I mean, I think it's just sort of legitimately strange. If you want to talk about female empowerment, they could all dress like Lady Vikings or something. I mean, there are all sorts of other things to dress as. On the abortion thing, I hear what you're saying, and they're absolutely pro-lifers.
Dirty. So they did a political show. Okay, yeah, I'll check that out. That would be interesting. I didn't know they did anything other than bash black men and black women in kind or in turn. If they do politics, yeah, I definitely want to see that.
Or committed to getting
by the way, this is what, and let me just do the commercial. Show ideas like Dirty Dude and I are chatting about. I tend to kind of, the hamps and the fatties and, the angry mans. I tend to, that's why I like watching Nightish's show. Y'all should subscribe if you're not, but I'm sure most of you are. I tend to keep up with that stuff vicariously through Nightish because I'm not particularly interested in their topics. But if they're doing politics, well, then I must watch at least, at least that show. So thank you, Dirty, for the show idea. So everybody make sure you hit the like, and if you're new, please subscribe and support the show. But giving me show ideas, giving me stuff to look at, evaluate, maybe I should know more about this. That is a show idea. That is a contribution, and absolutely appreciate it, Dirty.
Wade, purely because of abortion, and that was probably the driving thing for the politics. Don't dispute any of that. There are also an enormous number, or a significant number, of people who were against Roe v. Wade because it was terrible constitutional law. And I spend more of my time with those people than I did with the pro-life people. And I've always been sort of a little off kilter with a lot of my, National Review is a very pro-life place. But I think that one of the things that I think the pro-abortion rights people have missed in the post-Dobbs world is the GOP has essentially caught the car. That one of the things, and I think this is something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and other people were basically correct about, which was that because Roe was terrible law, it created the pro-life movement. Like, you don't get the pro-life movement but for Roe. And if it had been more incremental, if it had actually followed the policy preferences of Europe, I don't think you would have gotten the backlash that you got. And one of the things it allowed to happen was to make the left wildly more pro-abortion than it should have been, and to make the right wildly more anti-abortion than was necessary. And because no one was responsible for any votes, because the court took agency away from the elected branches of government to do more muddling through Disraelian kind of reform kind of things. And it led to the polarization of our politics in all sorts of nasty ways that was unnecessary. And if you look at the post-Dobbs world, abortion rates really haven't changed very much. People are getting abortions because it turns out that one of the things, and I know this drives a lot of anti-Trump people on the left crazy and a lot of anti-Trump people on the right crazy, but Trump has made the GOP functionally pro-choice.
Oh, I know. I had this argument lots of times where they went, well, Trump never moderates on anything. And it was like, well, he kept a federal abortion ban off the GOP platform at the 2024 election because he knew it was electoral poison. He didn't care very much about it as an issue personally, and he didn't want to, it was not a hill he wanted to die on. But I think that's interesting because that's actually, having done your pin into federalism, in a way, I think that this is an example of federalism polarizing people. The fact that you have a regime where you have abortion essentially up to birth in California and then will prosecute people, put a bounty on them in Texas. That's like, I think of American politics a lot of the time like two kids trapped together in the back of a car and they just can't help winding each other up. And, it's all very well to sit in the front of the car and turn around and kind of go, pack it in, kids, but each one will swear that the other one started it. And that is a situation where you're right. The European experience, I was in Ireland when they repealed their Ninth Amendment, and the Taoiseach at the time who advanced the legislation was very clear that it would be abortion up to 12 weeks, because that was a compromise, essentially, that even quite a lot of religious people could kind of understand. And it wasn't as horrifying to them as an abortion at 24 weeks or 34 weeks. And so what has happened, as far as I can see in Ireland since, is that that's become a kind of non-issue. Because the vast majority of abortions happen at the beginning of term anyway. And so everybody has had to not get everything that they want. But yeah, the American system is very different. You're right. And it is a fundamental problem for feminism and masculinism in America, is that the wins and losses tend to be all or nothing. It tends to be and yes, I personally am against kicking everything to the Supreme Court, with a wildly swinging ideological base every kind of couple of decades or so to sort it out and then hand it over to the next people instead of, your legislature voting on it. But that's what you guys chose.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, like, my colleague Sarah Isger has just written a wonderful book about this. I'm generally speaking, a big defender of the Supreme Court and this Supreme Court. And I think most of the problems that people have with the Supreme Court actually are the responsibility of Congress for sucking. And having, one of the places that the founders just got wrong, and I hate saying that, is they never imagined that Congress would voluntarily give up its prerogatives, powers, and prestige and outsource it to the executive branch and the courts. And that there wouldn't be jealous guardians of their status as the most powerful branch of government. And when Congress doesn't do its job, that's when you get presidents ruling by pen and phone, as Obama said. And when presidents do that, then all of a sudden, if presidents are actually legislating from the Oval Office, then someone's going to go to court and say the president doesn't have this power to do it. And that's how you get the emergency docket and all this kind of thing. If Congress actually could reattach its balls and do its job, then a lot of these problems will go away and we wouldn't be.
Okay, here is what this dumb fuck doesn't understand. Is your party right now, you're pretending you're not part of the problem, Jonah Goldberg. You are part of the problem. or were, and part of Congress not doing its job is happening in real time. Why are you not going after this Congress? See, this is what I don't like. Jonah Goldberg is doing some weird form of who, me? Dude, you are part of the problem. this this dude.
Referring power to the Supreme Court because Congress would be asserting its power. But look, I also agree with you. Like, I think, David French, I guess, was the first guy to make this point, to me at least, is that one of the reasons why you realize that the culture war stuff is so exaggerated is that both sides think they always lose.
Mm.
And that, as a fact of logic, cannot be true. And I wonder, what you think about the fact that, or the claim that, one of the problems that social movements get into is when they are successful, they have a choice: dissolve, high five each other, have a big last party and say mission accomplished, and then go find something else to do with their lives, or that they have to go look for the next great cause. And there's an argument that feminism reached this, right? Was that, there's an argument that the civil rights movement reached this. So when you got the legal obstacles to participation in life, you had to go find more granular niche kind of things. The gay rights movement is one of the great examples, where, I remember when the New Republic, after gay marriage became a thing, and like, there we go. The New Republic ran this cover story, meet the new great civil rights issue, and it was all about transgender stuff. And I have a lot of contempt for, say, the ACLU these days, which is campaigning.
You know what? I think I am going to just go ahead and end this here. Hearing Jonah Goldberg act like he wasn't part of the problem at National Review is just it's typical. So yep, this was a pop-up. Probably shouldn't have popped up, but once again, I had a great time. And Kim, give me a call. I have several things to ask you about, talk about, or what we could do is just email me. We can do a conference call because I really want we need to talk about, because I would love to have you, CKJ3, Lupin if I can get him, and a couple other folks. And I have a specific question for you, because I've had an off. Well, just damn it, Kim. If you have time, why not just click the link now? I can end the show and we can talk off air through this StreamYard. It'll just basically be a conference call. So let's see, did I post the link? Just click this link. I can end the show and we can just talk right quick. Just I have two specific things that I need your advice about. So if you have time, if you don't, just let me know, and that's fine too. We can do it another night. Okay, cool. So click the link. I'll just end the show now. Just click that link and it should bring you into the show. So folks, I'll be back at 3:30 tomorrow. Tomorrow we're gonna basically talk about education and kind of liberal arts, where liberal arts are. But kind of the education thing will be the point, at least for now. Who knows? It might change. So I will see most of you tomorrow.